What is it you want, Barry? What do you want? You want the moon? Just say the word and I'll throw a lasso around it and pull it down.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, dying times here.
Come with me if you want to live.
That's it, man. Game over, man. Game over.
The Force will be with you, always.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to 20th Century Geek. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and we are travelling still down the Ghostbusters path. We've done all the films. You've heard of that. We're entering into Fandom. I'm going to be talking to different people about their fandom, about their fan status and what they love about it. And today I've got one of the hosts of The Cheap Show, Paul Gannon. How are you doing? You okay, Paul?
I'm all right, thank you. Thank you for having me to talk about the subject I can't shut up about.
That's good. Yeah, well, that's the thing. That's the passion, isn't it? That's sort of like. Do you consider yourself a ghost head then? I
don't know. I'll tell you why. Because you know when you're a kid and you like something, unless your immediate friends are really into it, you kind of feel like you're in a bubble, right? So
yeah,
for me, growing up enjoying Ghostbusters was something more of a solitary thing that maybe one or two friends of mine were probably just about as into as I was. Fast forward 30 years and you have the internet and stuff, and it was like, oh, I thought I was a fan, but there are people who have spent thousands of pounds on a proton pack, or thousands of pounds in general, and there are fans flying out to New York right now for the premiere of the new film, and I'm like, yeah, I'm not that arsed. You know, it's like
it's like degrees, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, because there's different kinds of fans. There's the fan who knows all the facts and figures, like who's the DP and who directed and blah, blah, blah. And then there's the people who know the lore, the characters, the world. And then there are the fans who come in from the cartoons or the reboots or, maybe the new film. So you've got all these different people whose opinions of the film differ and change. And that's the nice part of any fandom, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I've talked to a lot of people online about this. And you're right about that level of commitment. There's a couple of like podcasts. Like, obviously, there's some very sort of specific Ghostbusters dedicated podcasts. There's one called Interdimensional Cross Rip, and just in the past, I've listened to a couple of their episodes that in and out and done different pieces. And when they've sort of like done like deep dives on some of the films, like they're referring to like call sheets that they've seen.
Yes, yeah.
And like I'm like, how do those things still exist? Like, who's got those?
You'll be surprised because things like this turn up in auctions. They people who've worked on the film will keep it in their belonging for ages. Then it turns up on eBay, and then it leaks, or a fan gets hold of one. Back in the day, the best you could get was a book called The Making of Ghostbusters, which was a close to shooting script version of the film, which was annotated by the production, some of the production staff on special effects and camera movements. So it was a kind of nice, it was basically the script, but with pages and drawings and things about what had changed from draft to draft. And that was like the early way to get your Ghostbusters nerd fix. But that book's pretty rare. It's out of print as well. And they should really reprint it. It's a great book.
Yeah, it's one of those, isn't it? That sort of, you probably find that the publishers out of business. I don't know, owns the rights. That's the problem with books sometimes. So they fall out of print, but then there's always like rights issues and stuff. And
then some bellend says, if you want to buy it, you can get it on eBay for £20,000. And you think,
yeah, well, I've got a copy.
Yeah.
There is those things that I find bizarre though. That, like you say, I don't understand why they haven't been reprinted. I came across relatively recently, last sort of year, the Ghostbusters 2 comic they did using
the Marvel does the real Ghostbusters doing Ghostbusters 2.
Yeah, I knew of it and I came across it for like a £5. It's a really battered copy, but I wanted to get it. But even that, I was like, why is this? Like, why isn't IDW sort of like snap this up and be like, right, we're doing this, or whatever.
It's a strange thing though, that particular comic book, because it kind of fell out of people's. I remember I bought mine on the shelf in Double H Smith's, and to be fair, when I bought it, it was in bad condition. I don't know what they were doing, the staff there, but it was like, because I can't remember who. I always forget the details when I need to, but there was an American comic book company called Wow or something, and they did a Ghostbusters comic book strip, but then Marvel UK did their own real Ghostbusters comic book, and that was kind of independent from what was going on in America. but it was that I think I might be wrong, but I think it was the American publisher who made the Ghostbusters 2 thing, but released it for UK Marvel in the UK. So kind of it's a strange thing, and also because it went from a shooting script, it has scenes in it which weren't in the final film.
Which is why I was so excited to get hold of it. Yeah, because it's got like, you know, Ray being possessed when he's driving Ecto and some other bits. And I was like, oh, this is really cool. It's a really, and the fact it's the real Ghostbusters characters as well is actually, I don't know, I kind of like that kind of stuff.
It was nice kind of brand continuity, because the cartoon series was still going on at that point. I think it was on like season 4 or 5. And so it was going to get a bit of a bump from Ghostbusters 2. But by that point in Real Ghostbusters, it was kind of ruined by the boardroom interactions and then telling them how to change characters. So it was, you know, it was necessary, I think, to keep all the brands on check, or whatever you want to say.
Yeah, you're right, but the cartoon, because the cartoon, well, the first film is my entry point. I can't remember being a kid. I was born in 81, so I was very young when it first came out. But I remember finding it on video around the time the cartoon came out, and then just being, you know, obsessed with it then. And then collecting on that monthly thing, the Marvel UK magazine, and that comic. Then that obviously be the real Ghostbusters. So I used to love that, and I've nice, like you say, you come across these things either online or in charity shops or odd places where they're like for a couple of quid, like you pick them up. So I've got a small collection of this, mate, to acquire.
Yeah. It's funny, I never had the annuals when I was a kid, but I've seemed to have bought them all in the last 6 months from charity shops in very good condition as well. So it's like, congratulations me, I guess.
Yeah, no, charity shops are bizarre. I've got 2 of them. I don't know what years they are. I've got the one with the blue cover. I can't remember the describe it. And there's one with the Ectos on it and stuff. But I was like, yeah, I picked up in charity shops as well. And it's just sort of like all of a sudden they're just sort of, we were away. I'm like, oh, I'll just have a look at this Heart Foundation shop, see what's in there. Find it for like 2 quid. Yeah.
Oh, I mean, that's what my podcast is literally about. It's like what the stuff, the magical kind of stuff you can find in a charity shop. And like the story I always tell is, I was in back pain one day coming home doing shopping. Just thought, oh, I'll randomly pop into Mind charity shop around the corner from where I live. And then I walked in there, and I saw in the corner a pristine board game called Dark Tower by MB Games Electronic, and it's like released in 1981. It's this huge, big plastic kind of black tower with a little computer in and revolving screens, basically Dungeons and Dragons. Long story short, I thought I have to buy it because it said 7 quid on it, and it was in great condition. So me, in my agony, carrying this heavy big box home with me. And then I got home and found there were people online selling it in mint condition for like $300-400. So it's crazy. I mean, I'm not selling it for that much. And to be fair, the people who put it on eBay for that much very rarely get it for that much.
Yeah.
So it's all, prospective prices. But best bargain I ever found.
No, that's amazing. I do find, this is a real side tangent, but I find charity shops like fascinating for that, because you either find a real bargain like that, and I found 1 or 2. Like I found a complete collection of Dennis Wheatley like hardbacks. Like 12 books for a tenner. So I've got they're really good. Really enjoy them. But the other thing is, then you'll look in the same one and they've got something where they'll have seen, especially now with comic book movies, they'll have some crappy comics that have been battered, and they're trying to sell each of those for like a tenner.
They chance their arm.
Yeah. But talking about comics, I mean, obviously the fan, we've talked about the real Ghostbusters stuff. Have you read any of the new stuff or newer stuff, really, sort of the IDW?
I'm selective about it. I kind of like the gimmicky episodes or the issues they've done. So when they did Answer the Call crossover with the original Ghostbusters, I really enjoyed seeing those characters tell more stories. I like the crossing over, where they crossed over every sodding Ghostbusters thing they could. Yeah. They stuck in that, and they just about made it work. Yeah. And then I the one they released where it was meant to be out before the film in 2020, but they released a thing called Year One, I think, which was about what happened either just before or just after the movie. And I thought they were all right, but it reeked of the prequels, where it's like, you don't really need to tell these stories. It's nice that they did, but they don't really need to tell this story about, Peter Venkman being a bit grumpy for a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. They're very much sort of like filler, aren't they? I don't mean, they were quite good fun. But yeah, they were not earth shattering. But I do like the fact that IDW have clearly got that, because they've got the comic rights to Ghostbusters, Turtles, Transformers, and obviously Ghostbusters comes as a package. So you get the crossing over event, but then they have crossed over twice with the Ninja Turtles.
It's crazy.
and
Everyone's crossed over with everyone, everyone ever. I mean, you look at Ready Player One, and that is just called crossover the movie. You know, there's very little plot. It's like Space Jam, A New Legacy, or whatever it's bloody called, and Ready Player One are like two of the worst things I've ever seen. Where it's just like, this isn't a film. This is IP masturbation.
It could be IP stew. It's just everything's been thrown in and stirred around.
Really is. And by the end you go, well, at least I saw Granny from Looney Tunes do the Matrix. I guess that happened.
I couldn't even bring myself to see Toon. It just I saw the trailer and I was just like, I'm not sitting through 2 hours of that.
I mean, come on, if you've seen the first film, the original Space Jam, you have a good idea that it's not a movie you're about to see. It's a bunch of thoughts some Coke had. It's like, it's what happens when a line of Coke gets sentient.
The trailer was just very much, I was like, this is, even my daughter was like, I can't stick this. It's too much stimulation in my eyes. I'm going to leave it. But with these crossover things, I am a sucker for them usually in comic form. Like you say, sort of. I've got all the Ghostbuster crossover ones. I even the Ghostbusters, the Transformers. I kind of enjoyed everything.
Everything's crossed over with everything. They've done Predator and Archie. You know what I mean? It's like whatever you can come up with.
That was really weird. That comic made no sense. I read the first issue. I was like, I don't know what tone this. I don't get it. I'm not sure what this is supposed to be. I'm not really a big fan of Archie.
A Garfield and Hellraiser crossover. I don't know how it would work, but I get the idea that John, Garfield's owner, would want to open the box and Garfield couldn't be asked, and then Pinhead can't do anything because, they all hate Mondays.
Yeah.
And then Garfield can say at the end, you don't need to take me to hell because I live in one perpetual mundane living existence of misery. And then it all ends on a really somber and reflective note.
Wow. Yeah. Just a really downbeat note. The fact that even like Pinhead's just like, oh man, you're even too fucked up for me.
You're too miserable, Garfield. I can't do it.
That's it. Yeah, I'm leaving. No, you're right though. There's been, again, it's where the money is at the IPs. I mean, I saw an article about even about this Ghostbusters Afterlife, and there was like the producers were saying like, oh, we want this to lead on to, a franchise that can enter all kinds of genres. And you're just like, oh, that's not.
Yeah, this is the fundamental problem I have with Ghostbusters, and this is where I guess I can go on a rant because don't get me wrong, all things Ghostbusters I love. There's very few parts of the Ghostbusters universe I think are reprehensible or off-putting or tonally a mistake, anything like that. But then recently with the issue is that Ghostbusters as a movie, fundamentally you have to remember, was like so different than what was already out there in cinema at the time. And yet it was quite classical American comedy. So it's been said often before that, all Dan Aykroyd wanted to do was take his love of the supernatural and basically combine it with his love of films like Bob Hope's Ghostbreakers or Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, and treat the horror properly and then treat the comedy as comedy. And so what you effectively got with Ghostbusters was a film that kind of straddled eras of comedy and horror. So you went from like the Hammer horror and the broad comedies of America and the kind of the Catskills kind of screwball comedy. And then you were moving into more natural kind of adult comedy, I guess, with Mel Brooks. And so by the time you got to the 80s, you'd had a few National Lampoon movies. Chevy Chase was breaking through, Dan Aykroyd was breaking through, Bill Murray. And then at the same time, horror was doing the same. It was moving away from broader genres and becoming more realistic with things like Poltergeist or The Entity and The Exorcist. And what Ghostbusters did when it came out was it kind of just jumped on all of that at the same time and packaged it together and created a film that was really different from anything else there hadn't been in the same way a quote unquote big budget comedy before. And so, yes, you had films like Mad Will, which cost billions of dollars and had a massive cast, but no high concept comedy.
No genre ones. It's the genre, isn't it? Yeah.
It was the balance of it which really works. It's like a slobs versus the jocks kind of film, like National Lampoon's Animal House, for example, but with Harold Ramis's kind of National Lampoon's Vacation sensibility. And then it's got this Cthulhu gothic horror lurking around the edges, and it's all treated respectfully. So when that film came out, it really did shock everyone. Well, the problem from that point on is, how do you keep that excitement going, and how do you keep that? And I contend, bar the real Ghostbusters, it's never really been able to.
Well, yeah, if you said it, because that's one of the things that's interesting about it, is that first film. We talked about. I was talking about the 2016 Ghostbusters, and I kind of like it. It's fun, like you said. I'm happy to return to it. I think some of the elements are really good. But the one thing that sort of stands out between that and the 84 version is the 84 version treats the horror like horror. From the opening scene with the library ghost, that when I was a kid, that scared the shit out of me. When that sort of reveals, I was like, Jesus Christ, And then you have elements like, when Dana is possessed and she's floating, like as you said, sort of it emulates or represents like The Exorcist, and it's got these sort of parallels to other horrors that are going on. And also, like you said, one of the key things that was happening in the late 70s into the 80s is this idea that horror, don't say it's coming home because it's not a football game, but like horror was moving into the suburban and into the modern.
Yeah, and it was no longer in big castles and spooky houses. It was now in small, middle America domains.
Well, that's one of the really interesting things, is that obviously the pinnacle of it, and one of the main kickoffs of that, is the Amityville horror. The legit thing, this thing that took off, and obviously the book was written in the film, and there's this idea then, and it sort of slows into like Burnt Offerings and Poltergeist and all these other films, but they're all in suburbia, and Ghostbusters is one.
But no, it's interesting because Poltergeist probably preempted. I mean, it's mostly the same effects crew anyway, but it really did bring the fantastical back to horror, but yet on a kind of recognizable human level, because Exorcist and Omen and films like that were all heavy on the religious iconography, the devils and demons and pure evil. Whereas, you see some of the ghosts in Poltergeist, and they're not too dissimilar from what you see in Ghostbusters. In terms of some of the designs.
Well, exactly. I mean, when right at the end of the film, when the final sort of big scare, when the mum tries to get in the room and that big one comes out, the big poltergeist monster thing comes out of that bedroom door and blocks her way. Yeah, that massively looks like a representation of the library ghost. It's got that same sort of like elongated face and the big fangs and that sort of thing. So yeah, it definitely has that that sort of look and feel.
The interesting thing though is, I think, going back to the point about why Ghostbusters worked and why people always say, oh, it's like lightning in a bottle. It was because it was a crazed production that went from crazy to manageable to cultural phenomenon, and they've been tracing that ever since. And while cinema's changed around it, Ghostbusters as a brand has had to reposition itself every time to try and compete. So if you look at, and this is my potted history of Ghostbusters now, so I apologize in advance. But so you have Ghostbusters, it happens in a big success. And then what do you want to do? Well, no one really wanted to make a sequel for a while. Columbia Pictures didn't want to make those kind of films for a while in the 80s. So it kind of, skewed its juices. Meanwhile, the cartoon series comes in because quite rightly, they noticed that it was big with kids because of the fantasy elements that were in Ghostbusters. And they wanted to extract that and keep the adult humor for the 84 film and focus more on the fantastical. So that's what it becomes for most of its 80s. And I think for most people, when they think of Ghostbusters, I would argue they think of the real Ghostbusters in terms of its tone, its character, the plots, what they expect from it. And for those 6 years, it's weird because unlike other Saturday morning cartoons, it was like a workplace comedy. It's just that their workplace happened to be, catching ghosts. But there was lots of downtime episodes or human interest episodes, which you couldn't get with Thundercats in some respects. So then you get to 89, the sequel. And the only reason they kind of wanted a sequel is because Columbia had just kicked out, what's his face? He was the big head of Columbia for a while. I forget, but it will come to me 20 minutes after we finish this conversation. Once he left, the new producers that came in, the new heads of Sony, decided they wanted to be more populist. And they went, what have we got in terms of IP? we have Ghostbusters. So they beckon them all back. Eventually, they get Bill Murray to agree. They make it, and it's not quite the same because now they're having to be a blockbuster and not an adult comedy with supernatural elements. And then Ghostbusters doesn't do very well. But I mean, it does very, very well for the first weekend. But then unfortunately, the next weekend, Batman comes out and no one wants that to happen. So then the kind of thing goes into limbo for years. And then we fast forward to 2016. And without going into all the bullshit, I think the interesting thing about 2016, and it's a film I really do enjoy, is that it's not trying to be Ghostbusters anymore. What it's doing is it's using the tone of modern Judd Apatow-esque comedy in America, which, to be fair, was what was going on in the early 80s with the Saturday Night Live crew and the Not Ready for Weekend primetime players. They were that same kind of group of comedians coming through from TV. And even they had people who say, I don't like this tone of comedy. It's not George Burns. Oh, I can't deal with it. And so Ghostbusters 2016 is effectively, when you think about it, trying to be a Marvel movie. And when you look at it, it's framed more like a Marvel movie, which is why I think the frights are lower. But I think the scale of it is more like you'd expect from a Marvel movie at the time. I think there's even parts of the score which are very reminiscent of Marvel at times. So whatever you think of that, I think that's what it was positioned itself to be. So we skip forward to 2016, to this year when we got Afterlife. And it's fascinating to see that film as effectively Ghostbusters repurposed as an Amblin movie. So it's more thinking, right, we're now going to work on our nostalgia for the Ghostbusters, but feed it through our nostalgia of the 80s instead. And there's a subtle difference because now what you're getting is Ghostbusters as seen through the eyes of people who loved E.T., Goonies, Monster Squad, Back to the Future. It's that kind of thing. And that subtly alters the tone of the film. So now Afterlife is a film that's much more about the nostalgia than it is about being a horror or particularly a comedy either. So it's just the way the Ghostbusters had to repurpose itself against, what's going on. Because Stranger Things is definitely the biggest influence on this film, for good or for bad.
Well, it's weird because we should highlight straight away that at this point, you've seen the film.
I saw it 2 weeks ago. Yeah.
You've seen it as a press screen. I haven't seen it yet. So no spoilers, please, Paul.
No, I'm going to do my very best.
But you're right about some of these things. But one of the things I'm sort of fascinated about is, again, like as you say, the state of cinema in each of these periods. And one of the things I always find interesting when I look at like Ghostbusters 2, for example, is the change in Janine. They've clearly gone, well, Annie Potts doesn't look like the real Ghostbusters Janine, but we're going to try. So we're going to do this, and they dollar up a little bit, and they inject some of that comedy. And as you say, by that time, sort of like Slimer had become a key figure in it all, so he had to come back, and they've got these other bits. And there's definitely more of that humor, softer humor, sort of.
It's very sitcom-y compared to the first one. I think that's a big look when you put the score on top of it. Ghostbusters 2 comes across like a sitcom cozy feeling version of the first film.
Yeah, I love the Ghostbusters 2 score. I really do. But you're right. It definitely leans more into typical 80s sort of
it's very of its time, 88, 89. Yeah. And it's fascinating because I got the score recently on vinyl. And when you hear it as, just music, you realize how bitty it is, like how the score is broken up into 2 or 3 minute segments, very rarely longer than 2. And it feels like it's because they're stabs, they're little bits that have been dropped in to the scene. And it feels a lot less cohesive than the Elmer Bernstein score as a result.
Yeah. Well, the Elmer Bernstein score feels like a whole, doesn't it? Like you can listen to that whole album or that whole score and it feels of a piece. And I feel that I say with the Ghostbusters 2 score, like you say, it's almost like interchangeable pieces that you could be like, right, we're going to have them in this order for this bit. And then actually I'm going to pull a little bit of that one, a bit of that one, and I'm going to slot it around and stuff. And like you say, I'm pretty sure that sounds like what's happened. But the film itself, like you say, it definitely is toned down. It's aiming to be, like you say, a blockbuster family. It's a family comedy. It's a family film.
And it's also chasing the identity of the real Ghostbusters, which at that time had been the majority of what people thought of when they thought of Ghostbusters. And it's funny because when you think about it, there have been 4 Ghostbusters films and all 4 of them were origin stories, basically. So you've never had that momentum of building the universe properly. And the only thing that's ever done that
Is
was the real Ghostbusters, or
Yeah.
Extreme Ghostbusters, if you want to push it. Because obviously, what I missed out with Extreme Ghostbusters is that was filled in that weird 90s void where it was just Ghostbusters, but 90s? Question mark, exclamation mark.
Yeah. Well, as I say, sort of it was 90s, so it had to be extreme. Everything,
Yeah.
you know, but it filled that slot. And again, I think that we'll get to the Extreme Ghostbusters actually because it's an interesting little mix. But yeah, I definitely agree with that. That 92 is chasing that identity, as I say, that you know the Janine sort of representation, and you know even though the mood slime, you know, it feels like okay, well now we've got a new toy we can market off the back of this, so that we've got other things we can do. It feels more like it's akin to that.
Well, it's interesting Ghostbusters too because like a friend of mine, Anthony Bueno, with his sister Claire, did the Cleaning Up the Town documentary, and part 2 is going to be about the making of Ghostbusters 2.
Awesome.
And 201, nearly every person working on Ghostbusters 2 said if they'd been given 6 months more to make this film, it would almost be completely different.
Yeah.
And I find that fascinating because I think, Ghostbusters, when it was commissioned, was given a ridiculously short turnaround. It was less than a year, I think, from go make it and release it. And Ghostbusters 2 had a similar problem, but I think it caught everyone off guard because of that second difficult album syndrome.
Yes.
And I think if they'd been given more time to make something, I think we would have had a film less structurally similar to the first film and maybe more identity and world building.
I agree with all the things I've talked about when we've been doing these reviews. Is I say about I really enjoy the pacing of the first film. Like, it's clear that there's a very sort of structured, it's classic sort of screenplay. It's got 30 minutes in, they're at the Cedric Hotel. And then 30 minutes before the end, that last the last finale is 30 minutes. When the shit kicks off, with all the stuff going off around the building, and then when you watch 2, the courthouse scene with the Scalera brothers, 30 minutes in.
Yeah, bosh. Then cut to montage sequence of them having a successful career.
Yeah, and then, exactly. And then 30 minutes before the end, that last 30 minutes, when the slime starts to ooze out and all that kind of stuff, and you get a 30-minute finale, and it's exactly the same. Like you play those films neck to neck, parallel, beat for beat, and so it feels like you recognize that as you get older.
And I would go further. If you watch the film Evolution, directed by Ivan Reitman, I would say structurally it's very, very similar as well.
Yes.
Because he was obviously because he took a horror film script and turned it into a goofy Ghostbusters-esque fantasy film.
And that feels like a very Ghostbusters. That's like a 90s Ghostbusters film, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, very.
But the thing about 2016, like I say, that big jump, is that thing of, like I say, leaning into the comedy. Even with 2, or having that soft comedy, more kids or family appeal, there's still moments in it that I find, even as an adult, like genuinely creepy. I've referenced several times now, sort of like Janosch when he goes to see Dana and his eyes light up like lights in the corridor, and there's a couple of things like that look legit creepy. And I just don't find there's anything like that in the 2016. There's nothing where they're really leaning into.
No, it's funny because I think it does all of that at the beginning in the the manor with the ghost that they go looking for, the lady who does the big slime projection thing. I always forget the name. But again, I think it's because it's working on a different tone. I think the interesting thing about Ghostbusters 2016 is that I think it's less about the quality of the picture objectively. It's more about, do you like the tone of this movie? And if you don't like it. And I think that makes perfect sense to me. Because what I would say with Afterlife is that it has a similar problem as 2016, where I think it can't do the horror because it's not interested in the horror.
Yeah, it's going to do something different. I am fascinated. I can't wait to see it. But
this is the thing. My opinion on it has been middling at best, right? Personally speaking. But I've said to everyone, I'm not out to hate it. I think everyone should see it if they're interested. And the important thing is, I genuinely hope it gets a sequel, because a sequel would be a far more interesting place for the Ghostbusters universe to quote unquote reboot. Because I think they do just enough to make you go, all right, I'll see more of this.
Yeah. What else have you got to show me, sort of thing?
Yeah. Because I mean, I've one of the things I do say about this film is that McKenna Grace, the star of it, who plays Phoebe, absolutely owns the film. And actually, it was one of the things I had worries going in, is like, can I deal with a film that has, a small child as a protagonist. And actually, she's very easily the best thing about the film. Easily.
She's one of those actresses that seems to have cropped up out of like nowhere. And I don't know if you've watched Handmaid's Tale.
Oh, is she in that as well?
She's in the 3rd season of that, and like, no spoilers. I'm not saying like but she appears as a sort of a traumatized character in that, and she is absolutely fantastic, like heart-wrenchingly so. And so then I can't remember. She's been in something else I've seen recently as well, and she just pops
someone
up.
said she was in Designated Survivor, which I believe was a Kiefer Sutherland TV show.
Yeah, that's on Netflix. So I've seen her in that, and like, so that's a couple of years ago. So even when she was even younger, so. Yeah, she's just one of these like kid actors that's like legit good. She's not being touted out because she's cute or whatever. Like, no, she seems like a genuinely really good actress. So
and every conversation you ever see with her promoting the film makes it seem like she is totally into it. She's a big fan. It's like Kate McKinnon, when she was talking about Ghostbusters, was saying this role was a lifetime role for her because she was a kid growing up wishing she could be Egon and not feeling herself represented, a character she could represent. So her playing Holtzman was like a big excuse for her to kind of be that child again and explore that character. And I think that obviously comes through when you see the film because she's easily one of the best things about it.
Again, Kate McKinnon is just one of the best things. I love Kate McKinnon in pretty much anything she does. I think she's fantastic. She's so funny. But but one of the things sort of thinking again about Afterlife, and I'm curious, and you can say yes or no on this without giving away too much. But obviously, we're now starting to live in a period of what has often been referred to as legacy sequels. This thing of like Blade Runner 2049.
Oh, the Star Wars sequels.
It's
everything.
This idea of like what happened with the gap. Willow. They're doing like a Willow TV show for Disney Plus. It's going to be Warwick Davis as Willow Ufgood now in this age. And I'm like, cool, sounds good. But there's this idea of the legacy sequel, like what's happened 30 years later, is definitely, is in the zeitgeist. And so, is this another thing that sort of, like you say, is Ghostbusters repurposes itself? It's positioning itself as going, we can actually hit the Stranger Things market as well as that legacy sequel market, to the extent of we're even going to hire a cast member of Stranger Things.
Right.
And then we'll be like, couldn't get it more on the nose if you tried. And I don't even know if Jason Reitman was like punking people. I don't know if that's sort of like,
you know what? There was I can't remember who said it. Was it Dan Aykroyd or Ivan Reitman said like the minute he saw Stranger Things, he knew what he had to do with the Ghostbusters franchise. And at that point, I was like, right, okay, you do what you've got to.
Yeah, but it's this thing again. You say about the repositioning, but look how successful like It Part 1 was. Again,
but the interesting thing about it was the story. So the genesis of it was the written page. It has that to go from, and they repurposed it to make it contemporary and use the time difference between the young and the old as a way to look at almost the tastes of horror and how it's changed in those times. Difference with Afterlife and most legacy films is what it's trying to do by filling in those gaps is it's like when you retcon a story. Doctor Who does it all the time, so you can make the next thing you say make sense. Where it's, the Doctor can say, "I've only got 13 regenerations," and then 2 seasons down the line, he goes, "Well, I've got as many as I need. It doesn't matter. I just need to tell the story." And I think a lot of legacy films do that, where they just go, "It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. We're just going to repurpose this because what do you know what's happened in 30 years? We're telling you now what's happened."
Yeah, and I'm interested. That's one of the things I'm really interested to see. Actually, like how much you said about it taps into the nostalgia. I'm quite curious, like how much does it tap into that idea of the legacy? Well, how much of the gap does it fill in between
it? I'm not going to go into spoilers, but it's interesting.
Okay,
because to me, and maybe I've missed a reference or two because I've only seen it once, it seems to ignore Ghostbusters 2, which is confusing.
Yeah.
And then there's a plot development, which I won't go into, which doesn't make sense to me because it seems the antithesis of what that character would do. So I was kind of like, okay, so they need to tell this story and they need to tell it this way and they need to tell it in a way that directly ties itself to 84. And that's kind of my big problem with it, in that I don't mind them repurposing Ghostbusters to be a family adventure about kids catching ghosts. But I am concerned when it's more about retelling that film rather than recontextualizing it or adding to it even.
Yeah. I'm interested to see, like I say, because even from the trailers, I think I saw people saying, like, you know, even the trailer when sort of like Paul Rudd's character says sort of like, you know, the 80s, it was like The Walking Dead sort of thing. And there's all these things like, you know, yes, people, you know, you might forget a 100-foot marshmallow man walking down the street. Don't think many people will forget the Statue of Liberty walking down the street.
This is the thing they say, which I can say because I don't think it gives away too much at all. But they basically say after what happened with Gozer in '84, the Ghostbusters ran out of work to do, and so they closed down because they were too good at their job. But then I'm thinking, but do they mean after '89 when all that shit happened with the slime museum and the Statue of Liberty and, you know, the slime flooding New York? No one wants to count that because that was pretty apocalyptic too. And then if you want to be even more nerdy about it, it definitely rewrites the Ghostbusters, the video game, which now makes no sense based on the plot of Ghostbusters Afterlife. Yeah,
well, I'm going to say, this thing of the Ghostbusters game being canon was always flimsy to me. It was always we're not going to make a 3, so we're going to give you this as an alternative.
Dan
I love the game. Don't get me wrong.
I like the game. And I do like how it ties 2 to 1 by saying the architecture just happened to put this stuff in place, which inadvertently helped Vigo draw the power that he needed to become powerful. And I was like, all right, that works. And they go into the hellscape and they fight, you know, Shandor and Zool again and all this stuff. And it's like, all right, it's a video game. I get it. It works. And they've kind of dealt with what I imagined. Because have you ever read the script that floated around of Ghostbusters 3? What's it called? Hell on Earth or Hellbent?
Yeah. Did it become a novel though or something? I remember the script kicking around. I remember reading it a while ago, but yes. Yeah.
So because I'm writing a book, I read the script for the first time properly. So I read a few pages here and there. But I sat down, I read the whole script in an evening, and it was the single most depressing thing I've ever read in my life because it was so bloody awful. Yeah. But it was interesting to see elements of it turn up in the video game. And it was very interesting to see certain elements of it turn up in the Afterlife movie. But what was interesting about Ghostbusters Hellbent was just how utterly unfunny it was. Because Dan Aykroyd's spinning like 7 plates in this script. He's got, it starts off with like a Ghostbusters van with a new team turning up at the old warehouse where all the Ecto-1s are kept. And as you flick on all the lights, there's like 50 Ecto-1s of different types of cars and buildings with different crews around New York with different departments. And it was like, that's cool. Unfortunately, all the new characters are unfunny and boring. But all right, that's cool. And then you get to about an hour into the script, you go, where's Venkman? It's mostly been Egon and, and Ray, and Winston pops in every now and then. But where's Venkman? And then right at the end with the denouement where hell is run by a guy who's basically a yuppie like Wall Street, and hell is run by this kind of weird, I don't know, like a banker, basically. And it all gets complicated. Ray and Egon end up in heaven, and they meet God, who shows himself to the Ghostbusters as Peter Venkman. So Bill Murray would come back from the dead as God, basically. He says nothing of note and then disappears, and it was like 2 minutes of screen time because the character of Venkman had died, but they didn't want to talk about it. It's full of crazy Dan Aykroyd shit like that.
Yeah. This is the thing. It's always interesting when you see these things, like, you know, first draft scripts turned into things, you know, like you say.
It is very virtual first draft script, because the first draft of Ghostbusters was mad shit too until Howard Ramis came in.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Like, it was this crazy sort of thing where they were like, oh, it's going to cost $100 million in '82, you know, sort of like, it's not going to happen. And you see, you get this feel that, like, you know, Harold Ramis was clearly a steady rudder. You know, he was like, we've got to tone this down. Obviously, Ivan Reich was involved as well, but like, this is what we've got to do. We've got to keep it funny and do this and that. And this happens, like they recently did, and because again, like I think it's Dark Horse or whatever have been doing it. They've been turning sort of like unproduced scripts into comics.
Oh, comic books and stuff, yeah.
And so they redid like Alien 3. You know, it was Ian Gibson Alien 3. Yeah, I'm glad it didn't become a film.
Yeah, right.
It's not good. It was like you say, it was all right at best. It was like 5 issues, and I was like, this barely holds together.
Yeah, it is one of those things. You know what? On that note, if IDW ever wanted to do a comic book series of Dan Aykroyd's Hellbent, I would be very interested to see it.
It works.
Fact, I'm going to tell them on Twitter this now. Actually, I'm going to do it right after this recording.
It's worth sort of seeing. It's, you know, when I see these things, I think, oh, it's cool. It's interesting to see, but like, it does give you that that avenue of going like, yeah, what was on film is better. You know, it may not be much better, but it's better. But the things you've just said there, one of the weird things is like Ghostbusters is falling into the Halloween territory, isn't it? Of like, choose your own adventure. So we've got Ghostbusters and Ghostbusters Afterlife. Like, you know, we've got Ghostbusters 2, and you could then call it a day. Or you've got Ghostbusters 2, the game, you know, to form your trilogy, or if you want that. But what I would say is the IDW comic, in particular, the Dan Schoening and what's it one that started from going back from issue 1 of that run, that fully acknowledges everything. So that sort of says like, okay, some of the, not maybe all of the IDW comic stuff that's happened, but it does sort of. But it says like, oh yeah, no, 1 happened, 2 happened, the game happened, and then the comic. Yeah,
and it's interesting because I think IDW done some of the best world building of Ghostbusters. In fact, possibly full stop, they did the best world building outside of the real Ghostbusters, because, you know, the films of ignoring the first, because my theory is always there's Die Hard, and then there's 4 John McClane movies. There's Raiders of the Lost Ark, and then there are 3 Indiana Jones movies. I kind of think of things like that, you know, so I don't get too het up about it. So I kind of think like, in many respects, Ghostbusters is a bit like that. There's Ghostbusters, and then there are 3 Ghostbusters movies, you know, and you can pick and choose what you like from each, because, to be fair, for all the ups and downs, none of them are reprehensible. You know, it's just hard when you're living in the shadow of the classic film. Yeah, well, that's always going to be the way, isn't it? Like, you know, there's always that thing of that's the pinnacle, you know, and it's not. It's, you know, it's very rare that a sequel meets or beats, or I should say beats or even meets the original. You know, you get the few, arguably Terminator and Terminator 2. Yeah. But other than that, like you say, you that second album is a real problem. But my theory has been, this is going to sound really cruel, Ghostbusters is not Marvel. It's not Star Wars. It's not Star Trek. Ghostbusters was one hit comedy in '84, which blew everyone's minds. And the only reason we still have these conversations as fandom is because we fell in love with the real Ghostbusters, which gave us the fixes we need. And if it was a bad episode one week, doesn't matter, because Beneath These Streets is on next week, and that's a banger. You know, you've got things like that. And so you've had this thing where it's like, Ghostbusters should stop trying to be the next Star Wars, the next thing. And this is the fault of Sony, because they only have 2 IPs worth of anything, and it's Ghostbusters and Men in Black. And you see what they did with Men in Black recently. Oh, God, you know, yes. Sony struggle as a company, full stop, with dealing with stuff, because whereas Disney want to have things that fill their theme parks, Sony make films so they can put their laptops and mobile phones in them. There's a subtle difference. There's 2 things I want to come to on that. There's a conversation, and it's been an open conversation by Sony, of them saying like, we are going to have a last ditch push for a bunch of stuff, and if it doesn't work, we're selling them all off. Like, we'll see how that goes, because that would leave Sony with nothing. But they don't care. They want to sell off their film studio. They're just going to go, we're going to focus on tech. I kind of think they should, though, because like, this is not what I want, but I feel Ghostbusters would be better hands with someone like Disney. You know, just because I feel like we might get a decent bloody theme park ride out of it finally, if nothing else. But it's just the strangest thing. It's like Ghostbusters, in my opinion, should be like a Netflix series now. Yes. You know, something where you can start a story, tell it over 7 or 8 episodes, have it like, you know, the Buffy structure almost. Monster of the week, but a story going on in the background with an apocalypse building or a big case, and tell some new stories and get to know these characters. And, oh, look, there's Dan Aykroyd turning up for 1 episode. There's your star. Or something I would love to do, like the way Big Finish make Doctor Who's, I would love to make audio Ghostbusters adventures.
Fill in the
things
gaps.
like that.
Yeah, fill in the gaps.
Fill in
with
the
audio
gaps,
adventures.
build the world, tell interesting and different stories that you can't risk doing in the cinema because you've got to make sure that first weekend box office allows you to do more.
Well, you said about the world building, and one of the things, that thing of filling in the gaps. One of the things I love in the comics is Winston.
Yeah,
Winston in the comics, in the IDW books, especially the Dan Shonian stuff, is a great character.
It's just because he gave him the chance to actually say more than just be an audience surrogate.
Yeah, exactly. They give him a really fleshed out background. They've given him a family. He's got, he's had relationships and all this other stuff. Like, he's really grown and become a really interesting character. And I always feel when I do go back and watch 84 and 89, like, I do feel for Ernie Hudson. And I'm like,
God, yeah. I mean, the stories that he told on for Cleaning Up the Town documentary was that when he got the script that he agreed to sign on and do, and all these great lines in, and then he turned up on set and like half of his lines have been cut out or given to Bill Murray. Yeah. And it's just like, yeah, that would suck too, because apparently he nearly punched Ivan Reitman on set or something, or threatened him and wanted to walk off. And I kind of think, yeah, I'd be like that too. Yeah,
my understanding is he was given what has been referred to in a few cases as the Eddie Murphy script.
Right, yeah.
So when it was offered, because they were talking, they thought, oh, we'll get Eddie Murphy, and he's an up and coming SNL star, like he can be the Winston, and they were going to give him those lines, and then they obviously brought Ernie Hudson in, and they were like, actually, do you know what? Some of these are really good. We're going to start distributing them around the other characters.
I would still say he gets some of the best lines in that film still. It's just a shame because like it's so strange. Structurally, in terms of plot, his character is pointless. If he's meant to be like the rational human audience surrogate who comes in and says, this shit's crazy, you shouldn't really bring him in 45 minutes into the film. Yeah. He needs to be right there at the beginning so he can roll along with it. Up until that point, Venkman's meant to be the audience surrogate because he's the wink to the audience that this is crazy, but don't worry, I'm here. And then Dana walks in, and then that character's done with being an audience surrogate, and now he's got a love interest and a story. So it's kind of weird how that film, although it's got a great script, doesn't really have a good plot. You can have a great script that doesn't really have a great plot. And I think Ghostbusters is one of those films where it builds up, sets its world up, builds up, and then for the last half hour just goes, oh, and the apocalypse. And you go, right, fine, I'll buy it because I like you and these characters and this world. I want to see where this goes.
Yeah, I agree. It works on that level. But I say that you're right. The plot has got issues, and again, even some of the characters have got issues. I know I've often had to defend it for people that have accused Venkman of being, beyond lecherous.
That scene in Dana's apartment, on reflection now, is less cute when he puts his foot in the door and demands a kiss, and you think, yeah, that's creepy, man.
It doesn't work anymore. It's a little weird. But then I spoke to a friend of mine, and she said, actually, flip it around. It's actually a really good scene of representation because Dana doesn't take any of his shit. Like she's an independent woman living as a musician in New York in a great apartment, and she's not going to take any shit from Peter Venkman. Like, so it sort of works both ways. Of like, Venkman's a dick.
I think on the page. Yeah, on the page, it probably doesn't come across as abrasive as it does when Bill Murray starts putting his improvisations or inflections or whatever into it. And I can't help but think in the script, and I might be proven wrong, and it might be right there in the script, but like I can't imagine him putting his foot in the door and demanding a kiss was in there, other than him saying that on the way out, and then she slams the door behind. So somewhere in the performance, it just comes across as a bit much. Yeah, because I walk away from that scene, even as a kid, to be fair, going, what does she see in him? Really?
Yeah. It kicks off his arc. I've always said that Venkman's arc is him being a selfish con artist, and then by the end of the film, willing to sacrifice himself to save Dana.
And that's something that people forget about as well, is that there are characters in that. They aren't just line delivery systems. Yeah. And, one of the things I always defend about 2016 is that I think it's interesting how I didn't expect there to be a really warm core about friendship in that story, and about how it's more about these two girls coming together. after being apart, but falling in love with something as kids, one going into it and one throwing it away for a way, and then coming together, and you realize at the end of the film it's about their relationship. And that was really touching, something that you don't expect.
No, and it works. I mean, one of the things, again, having spoken about it very recently with a friend of mine, and she sort of said it runs parallel better. A better comparison for that film than Ghostbusters 84 is Bridesmaids.
Yeah. But it's, same director, same sentiment in terms of comedy.
Yeah.
Same talent pool. It's just, again, it comes down to tone. I think you either like the tone of Ghostbusters or it puts you off. And I genuinely understand why it puts people off.
Yeah.
But there's stuff in there that still, to me, I when people say, and this really pisses them off because they instantly go, how dare you call yourself a Ghostbusters fan? But I'm like, I can't help it. This is my worldview. But like when people say, what's your favorite moment in any of the Ghostbusters films? I say, it's the Holtzman Times Square slam down sequence, because it's everything I wanted as a kid when I wanted to see a Ghostbusters movie. And the way the score ramps in the theme tune, the Ray Parker Jr. theme, and it's over too soon is my only real complaint, because that whole scene, the Times Square slam down, is something you hadn't seen in Ghostbusters before. You'd seen them all stand there shaking their wands and at one thing, but you'd never seen them taking on hundreds of ghosts with different types of equipment and, slime and grenades and everything. And it was like, this is cool. You might not like the comedy, but I think this bit's fucking awesome.
No, I agree with that. That bit where she's like, "Oh, I forgot I've got the new toys," and she gets the two handguns as well, and then she lick. Yeah, that whole section is ace. It
still gives me goosebumps when that music kicks in, and I'm like, "This is all I want. Just give me the cheap thrills, please."
Yeah. No, I 100% agree with that, because that's one of the moments I hold up there as if probably top 5 moments across all the films.
Yeah.
Want to quickly cover off, like we say, we've been talking for a while, but one of the things we will cover off is the real Ghostbusters. We've sort of skirted around it and we've talked about it and referenced it, but like you actually mentioned an episode, like, Beneath the Streets, which is a great episode.
It's almost worthy enough to have been a Ghostbusters 3 plot. It could have easily have done, it's that epic.
That was going to be my question, because there's a couple of episodes where I feel the same, and that's one of them is Beneath the Streets, and the other one is Knock Knock.
Is that the Bogeyman one?
No, it's the one where the subway guys find the door. They're drilling the subway.
Oh God, with the big knocker.
Yeah, and it says, "Do not open until doomsday," and it opens.
That's right.
And all the tube trains become like big worms, and there's all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
And there's a moment.
That is a great one.
Yeah, well, I love that episode because at the end of it it feels similar to Ghostbusters, because the end of it is about them sacrifice themselves. They march through the door to then obviously shoot into this heart of this thing for everything to be sucked back in. And they're like, yeah, we may or may not make this out. And there's the jokes. There's a very sort of Venkman joke where they're about to climb in, and Venkman says to Ray, Ray, I'm going to go over to the neighbors. They're playing their music too loud. Are you coming? And then they climb up to go in.
Yeah.
This thing. And I'm like, this episode is brilliant. Like, it's really good.
It's a great example of why Ghostbusters, the real Ghostbusters, is different from things like Thundercats and Transformers and G.I. Joe or whatever else at the time, because the humor in it is off kilter for a kid show, and that kind of humor only works really when you know who Bill Murray is.
Yes.
And that doesn't necessarily take anything away from the script, but it shows you just how much they understand that character. Because Venkman isn't a character. Venkman is just Bill Murray in a jumpsuit, in that first film. And that's what it is, because you could take Bill Murray out of that, plonk him in Stripes, same basic character. Take him out of that, drop him in Meatballs, same thing. Whereas when you see him as animated Bill Murray, all of a sudden that becomes the character. And you need lines like that to remind you that this is based on a adult comedy. And it shows that there's a familiarity, there's a world there, it's lived in, there's a shorthand between characters.
Yes.
And that's really interesting. It's one of the things why, because don't get me wrong, lots of real Ghostbusters, and especially towards the back end, is awful. But that's just because of the nature of, they had to make, what it was, 140, I mean, it was a first commission of about 80 odd episodes. So they were churning it all out. And I think you see the ideas running out halfway through. But even at the beginning, I lost count of times of how many episodes begin with Slimer accidentally doing something naughty, which causes a chain of problems, which, you know what I mean? It's like, so many plots begin with Slimer doing something he shouldn't. And you just think, all right, but
Well,
there's
that's the
more
thing.
to.
You get because you get like Slimer Come Home and Adventures in Slime and Space, and you get those ones where it's Slimer centric. And some of those are okay, and but there are ones that like my go to, like say Knock Knock, Beneath the Streets. I'm trying to think of I'm trying to think of the names, but there's one called Cool Collector Cthulhu.
Yeah. This is what I love about it, because one week can be epic where they're dealing with demigods and things and weird monsters, made up of steel that's come together because it's that episode. What's it called? Lost and Foundry.
Yes.
That's a great one. But then there's episodes where it's like dealing with Egon, because you find out he got into ghost hunting because of the bogeyman. And that's a big, scary thing for him. And he has to deal with that. It's like, you can tell those smaller stories as well.
Yeah, well,
and that's what I'd love to see more of.
Yeah, because the one about Egon where his uncle turns up and makes him go back to work in that other laboratory.
Yeah.
And there's this weird episode. There's great episodes at the Revenge of Murray the Mantis.
Yeah, which is an odd one.
It's one of the odd ones I kind of like, but like it ends with Stay Puft fighting a giant praying mantis.
Yeah,
it's bizarre, but I'm like, that's really cool.
One of the curses of Ghostbusters is that it's too good, right? And so when something's too good, why don't you steal from it all the time? But every time I see the Marshmallow Man in any appearance outside of the first film, I go, it make no sense.
Yeah.
Stop it. It's like,
Well, the problem is, like you say, and I agree, because it sort of becomes frustrating, when you see him and he gets obviously touted out in the real Ghostbusters repeatedly, I'm like, Stay Puft isn't a character in and of himself. He's a manifestation of Gozer.
Specifically, he's the manifestation of Dan Aykroyd's idea of what he would like to face in the final battle, which he would think would be an easy win. And that's the joke. That's why that's such a great joke. Because when I saw Ghostbusters for the first time and they say, the traveler has come and you hear the footsteps stomping, I had to cover my eyes because I thought I was going to see something terrible and monstrous. And then the audience started laughing. And because I'm, insecure, I thought they were laughing at me because I was scared. But I didn't realize it was because a great big marshmallow man had just appeared on screen. And that's why that works. And so it just about gets away with that in 2016 because it's more of a joke than an actual threat. Yeah. But in Afterlife, I was sitting there going, there is no reason for mini Stay Puffs. I'm sorry. It's cute, but I hate this.
It's one of the first things when they released that clip. I was in. I still am, and I probably will be until the film. I'm in two minds about it because there's a part of me that just goes, "Oh, this was probably a studio directive of like, we want to see Stay Puft and we want to be able to sell shit. So get stuff in there that can become toys." And they've gone, "Oh, mini puffs would be a fantastic idea because
it sounds like Minions as well, doesn't it?"
Oh, well, totally. And I'm assuming they make a similar noise because they sort of do in the clip I've seen. So
yeah, no, they do. It's this. I mean, look, I think everyone should see it. I'm on the fence about it, but I was struck by how similar it was to the film Goosebumps, which came out a few years earlier, which was also a Sony film.
That's not a bad thing. I kind of like that film. Even as an adult.
If I was 8 and I'd seen Goosebumps, it would be my favorite film of all time. And the only thing that kind of stops it from becoming a film I, as an adult, love is because I kind of feel the last 20 minutes doesn't really work and it gets overloaded with some of the CGI. That being said, that is still a fantastic kids supernatural comedy. And I'd love it if I was a young'un. But Ghostbusters Afterlife really has that flavor. For good or for bad.
I think we'll leave it there because I'm really sort of there's part of me that I want to see it, but I'm tempted to ask questions. I'm not.
Definitely see it because there's lots and lots of good there.
I'm going.
There's lots of good in there, and I hope it's successful because it really deserves a sequel where it can stand on its own with the characters that they developed.
Yeah, the thing is, what I say is, I do respect and kind of like the fact that they have gone. There's going to be something there for the sort of like, the people that were in love with the real Ghostbusters and saw the original and so on and so forth. But they are fully aware that they're looking for a new generation. Yeah.
And that's completely fine. I wish they'd done something a little bit more original whilst leaning on the 84 iconography. and that's just my bugbear with the film. I have others, but I'm going to go into a massive rant about that once the film comes out. But genuinely, the bottom line is I really hope it's a success, because I think the franchise kind of that's not fair, deserves it. And I would genuinely like to see where it goes if it's successful. Yeah. I'd prefer a TV series spin-off, but what do I know? I'm not the Suits.
Yes, that's it. Yeah, not the money man. One of the things I'm always curious about, and we'll sort of wrap up on this before we go into the final questions. I look at like other cartoons, and this is where I think you're right about the difference between Ghostbusters and those other 80s cartoons, Thundercats, Transformers, Ninja Turtles. They've had iteration after iteration. You know, like Turtles has been remodeled and rebooted, like the same story, like repeatedly. You know, from the 80s cartoon through to the early 2000s, and then the CG one, and so on and so forth. The same with Transformers. That's like multiple iterations.
Oh yeah, they're like Pokemon these days. You can't keep track.
Yeah, and the same with all like Thundercats has had a couple, and all those things. And so even like He-Man, like, you know, we've got He-Man Revelations now, so they're all coming back. They all had these different iterations. Ghostbusters only really had Extreme Ghostbusters, and that sort of acted as a sequel.
Yeah, and they do turn up in the last 2 episodes of Extreme Ghostbusters, or the original crew. Honestly, Ghostbusters never really went away. The problem is, outside of real Ghostbusters and the real Ghostbusters, everything since then has been like chasing the dragon. It's been trying to get that high, it's not just Ghostbusters. You look at the Star Wars sequels, and they're chasing that high that we had when we first saw those films. It's not specific to Ghostbusters. The falsity is, we shouldn't be chasing what we felt when we were kids. We should be asking for things that make us feel like kids. Does that make the difference?
No, yes, I agree. I 100% understand what you're saying.
Because I'm never going to get that high again from seeing Ghostbusters. But if I'm going to see a new Ghostbusters film, give me something new or different.
There's a thing of like, there's a sensation of going to see a film and being like captured by it, you know, sort of like really being in the moment with that film, and like you say, being sort of not just taken back to your childhood, but being able to enjoy it as a kid. I think sometimes sort of like horror can, you know, I'm going to be really like Halloween Kills recently. Not overall a great film.
I did not like that film.
But I'm a bit of a, you know, not so much a gore hound, but I like it when horror goes daft. Like I'm really sort of like all for, you know, balls out, go stupid or go home. So when that film goes all out, I was like, yeah, I am so into this that I was just into that film in that moment.
But it's imagine it like this: there's Halloween, and then there's like
Michael Myers
11 Michael Myers films, and that kind of contextualizes it better in your head, I think.
No, and I've never really thought of that, and I'm definitely going to keep that. I like that idea. It's a good theory. It's a good sort of thought process to sort of
just takes the edge off getting stressed every time they make a new Indiana Jones movie or whatever. You think it's not Raiders, but God, don't let it be Crystal Skull.
Yeah. I'll never forget seeing Crystal Skull. I saw it in cinemas. I was in America at the time, and it was me and 2 other people in there. And I was in Las Vegas, and I went to see it. And then as we came out, me and these 2 other guys just looked at each other, and just sort of like the look of like general disappointment between strangers was palpable.
The thing is, I think the first half of that film is fine. The minute they get to the jungle, all the wheels, the doors, the engine just come off.
Yeah.
And it just becomes this onslaught of what you're doing. That makes no sense. Why are you doing that? And it's the blockbuster equivalent of like Blue Balls, because I remember seeing it going, it's going to kick off now. Oh, look, there's a great big machine with blades. I bet Indiana Jones is going to have a fight on that tree chopping machine. Oh no, he's just blown it up with a bazooka, and that's that dealt with. Oh, and now it's a CGI race for the jungle with monkeys. Oh, right then.
For me, the moment, and I know it became that sort of the cliche, but the moment, the bit of climbing in the fridge, I wasn't bothered by.
No, I was fine with that. It's stupid, but
it's the gopher.
You see, I think that's symbolic. Right. My theory about that is that's Spielberg literally saying to the audience, you're making a mountain out of a molehill.
Right.
I think he's saying, I this is just my theory, and it's not qualified anywhere else. But the fact that it turns from the Paramount Mountain to a molehill says to me that Spielberg's saying, calm down, it's just a bloody Indiana Jones movie. At the same time, that also tells me Spielberg's thinking, oh, don't worry, it's only a bloody Indiana Jones movie.
Yeah.
You think, there you go then.
That's what it sort of said to me, because all it made me think about was Caddyshack.
Yeah.
And I was like,
that would have been awesome.
Yeah.
If it'd come out dancing.
Yeah.
It's all right. Nobody think about us. That would make the film the best one.
Exactly. It would have elevated it. But you're right about this idea of sequels and how things, like you say, if you have RoboCop and then you have RoboCop movies, you know.
Yeah,
it's
right.
Yeah, I get. I like that.
There's very few trilogies or sequels where you can say there's unity. Like, I would say Lord of the Rings is the obvious example, because they are a 3-part story told thusly, right? And maybe you can say Back to the Future, maybe. But the rest of it's just, Godfather. The thing is, no one goes, I'm going to make 3 films in a row and tell this story, because financially that makes no sense. Lord of the Rings was a big gamble, it just happened to pay off. And the fact that Avatar, there's going to be 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I'm like, I don't even think we need a second one of those, Jim. But, it's odd. Whereas sequels are, by manufacture, a process of recapturing the success of something that has already been proven, theoretically, which is why you get things like Beverly Hills Cop 3, which just sleepwalks its way through everything.
The only, I'll throw this out before we finish, because do you know what? I think you and I could talk about this for fucking hours. But,
and I need to eat some food, so I need to do that real soon, mate.
The last one I'll say is for me, I call it the sort of one of the great American trilogies, is Rocky 1 to 3.
Maybe.
Because that works to me as a sort of like as a saga, as a tale, the whole thing. I love the rest of the Rocky films. I'm even partial to Rocky 5, but I would challenge you on the best sequels of the 80s. Do you know what I would suggest? Go on.
Star Trek 2, 3, and 4.
Oh yeah, no, yeah, I agree.
You know what I mean? They're not overall great movies apart from 2, but they're a nice little trilogy.
Yeah. And I love the fact it ends on 4, and they're just basically at that point like, fuck it, yeah, we're going to go do a comedy. We're going
to toss about in the past.
Yeah, we're going to do an 80s comedy with the Star Trek crew.
But that was the most successful one they ever made at that point as well. Yeah. And it was because Leonard Nimoy quite rightly said, look, we've done how many apocalyptic battles in space now and planets blowing up and the life and death. Let's chill and have fun with these characters. And it's like, for whatever else you want to say about it, it's very 80s, because it also taps into that 80s kind of cocoon
the eco
style of
and stuff.
Starman, cocoon type of sci-fi that was there at the time as well. So it's got the DNA of that, and it just works as a really nice sequel of different tones.
I love those 3 as a trilogy. And then they thought, do you know what? William Shatner's turn. We'll give him 5.
Yeah, that's the thing. But the thing is, I feel sorry for Shatner, because I don't think he's the problem. I think the problem was he was let down by the production and the special effects. And when you can't achieve the things you have written down in this script, and by all accounts, the original script was much more epic and higher stakes, that when you turn around and you can't even have what you want on screen, even a spaceship going by, it must be demoralizing. It's
worth reading the novelization.
Apparently so, yeah, because it's got all the lava monster stuff in at the end and things, hasn't it?
It does, yeah. It's worth reading the novelization. It's a slightly different story.
But then the gift is you get Undiscovered Country after that, and I think Undiscovered Country needs to get more love, because I think it's just as good as 2.
Yes, I totally agree. It's probably my it's in my top 3, easy.
Yeah. I've just, all of a sudden, the last few months, for some reason, I've gone on a big Star Trek bent. So I've been buying selective Blu-rays, because I saw like Star Trek Beyond, and I hated the second one so much that I'd given up hope on Beyond. And when I saw it a few months ago, I was like, oh, I really should have given this some time at the cinema, because this was like the best Star Trek since Star Trek 6.
Yeah, I honestly think, I don't know why we've gone this parallel thing, but I've done the same. Like recently, towards the start of the year, I watched like motion picture. Well, this year I watched like motion picture. And I was like, I should try some of the others. I think I kind of like them, and I've just plowed through them all.
Yeah.
And there's ones where I'm like, yeah, that's god awful. Like towards
Insurrection.
Insurrection really just made a Nemesis. Like,
Captain
really...
Picard goes on a hike with some bloody hippies. It's not what I want to see.
Yeah. But there, even in every other film, a bit like you said with Ghostbusters stuff, there's something I like. they might not be great as a whole, but there's like, even I really like the motion picture, like the stuff in it that I really enjoy. Anyway, this is a massive tangent, and we may do another show. We can just come back and talk this shit for hours.
Yeah.
But final question, and so Paul, because you'll be able to sort of give a pop for your show as well. Final question then: do you believe in ghosts?
Yes and no, because I went ghost hunting for about 5 years of my life and had some crazy adventures and had stuff that I can't explain. But do I believe in life after death? No, probably not now. I'm a bit pragmatic about it. I think we turn to rot. So I enjoy the spookums, but I don't know. I'm on the fence, like everything.
That's a good place to be. That you can lean either way, depending on what you're feeling. Halloween's always a good time to sort of go, yeah, of course I believe. And then Christmas, no, the
cash
summer,
in on that, ka-ching.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you very much for coming on to talk Ghostbusters. I've really enjoyed it.
My
and
pleasure.
Everything else. But before we leave, where can people find you, and where can they find the Cheap Show?
So I have a weekly podcast called Cheap Show. Me and my co-host Eli Silverman attempt every week to find treasure in the trash that we find in charity shops, bargain bins, Poundlands, discount stores, wherever. And we try and have a bit of fun with it, from food to toys to games to films to all sorts. Whatever we can find in a charity shop, we have a chat about it. So if you want to know more, go to thecheapshow.co.uk, and that's your one-stop shop for everything, because we've got videos, pages for all the podcasts. The podcast is on everything. If you've got Spotify, it's on that. If you've got iPad, Apple thing, it's on that. If you've got Stitcher, it's on that. So just look for Cheap Show. And if you're on Twitter, it's at the Cheap Show Pod, and I'm at Paul Gannon Show. And I think I got that out quite quickly, because I've said it now for 6 bloody years.
But well done. Yeah, that was very concise. Loved it. And it will be in the notes below. There'll be a link to the website and to the Cheap Show and Paul's Twitter feed as well. So, as I say, Paul, thank you very much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And ladies and gentlemen, if you enjoy what we're doing on this show, go to your podcast catcher. We're all over the place as well. Pretty much every podcast catcher. We're out there. Leave a review, 5 stars, 4 stars, whatever you want to do. All the feedback is appreciated. And if you really like what you do and you want to help us keep the lights on in 20th Century Towers, go check out our Patreon. That's patreon.com/20 CG Media. And on there, we do all kinds of bits and pieces. I've got a weekly podcast where we go trekking through the Twilight Zone. I do a monthly podcast of my 30-minute thoughts and a whole bunch of other stuff going on there, behind the scenes things and different bits and pieces. Hours and hours of podcast entertainment. So go check that out. But ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. And we shall speak to you again soon.